Uh, Today, our webinar is devoted to an important colleague, a great peace scholar, Tony Marsella. The webinar is titled A Man of Peace, a tribute to Tony Marsella. We have four speakers today, and we are really fortunate to be able to gather four different people who knew Tony well. And I'm personally quite happy that this is happening because I never got to meet Tony myself. Uh, the only way I got to know him was through his work and email correspondence. Therefore, I won't be able to say much during this webinar, and my only contribution is basically setting this webinar up. And from the very beginning, we should thank Roy Idelson for taking care of the details. What I will do is to introduce the speakers one by one before we start so that we don't have to interrupt the flow as we go along. As I said, we have four speakers today. The first speaker is a colleague that I know quite well. In other words, I'm fortunate to know her quite well, Susana. She is joining us from Hawaii. Susana is a community and culture psychologist. She graduated from the University of Hawaii, Manoa in 2002. Tony was her dissertation advisor, and he encouraged and supported Susana to pursue a career working with children and youth in the context of families, peers, schools, and communities in Hawaii, the United States, and beyond. As a professor in the Department of Psychiatry, Susana uh, worked in different places and also as a community practitioner. She has focused on prevention, health promotion, particularly in rural and native Hawaiian communities. She will share particularly her graduate school memories with Tony Marcello. Next, we have Anne-Marie Yamada. She's joining us from California, if I'm not mistaken. She's Associate Dean and Faculty in Social Work at the University of Southern California. She completed her PhD in Clinical Psychology in 1999 under the guidance of Tony Marcella at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. As a degree fellow at the East-West Center in Honolulu, Anne-Marie received a PhD certificate in intercultural studies and was honored for distinguished service. For more than 2 decades, she has shared Tony's passion for enhancing the quality of life and quality of care delivered to underserved and underrepresented populations, especially those with severe mental illness. She is honored to lead Tony Marcello Legacy Committee, preserve and continue promotion of his scholarship and dedication to global peace. Our third speaker is Kathleen Malley-Morrison. She's a professor emerita from the Boston University Department of Psychology, where she taught nearly for 50 years. Her primary research program, conducted through the decades with the help of hundreds of talented and hardworking undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral students, focused on the causes, correlates, and outcomes of various forms of family violence. Following September 11th, her research team expanded to an international collaborative effort, including data collection and analysis in more than 50 countries with thousands of participants. In her later years, her professional work benefited from the consistent encouragement of her friend, Tony Marcello. Our fourth speaker is also joining from Hawaii. He is Dharm Bhawuk. So he's a professor of management and culture and community psychology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He has published more than 120 papers and 5 books, including Indigenous Indian Management, Cambridge Handbook of Intercultural Training, Barriers and Opportunities at the Base of the Pyramid, Indian Psychology, Lessons from the Bhawuk Gita, and Asian Contributions to Cross-Cultural Psychology. He's a founding fellow of the International Academy of Intercultural Research, a fellow of the Indian Academy of Management, a foreign fellow of the National Academy of Psychology, India, and visiting fellow Center for Creative Leadership. So as you can tell from this introduction, we are fortunate to have four speakers with us. Before we begin, I should perhaps say that Tony passed away last year. He was at the age of 84 when he passed, and he passed peacefully on November the 10th. So we tried to schedule this webinar as closely as possible to the anniversary of his passing. And so we're basically not too bad. It's just a week away, basically. So once again, thank you very much to our speakers today for joining us so that we can pay tribute to Tony Marsella. So we will first begin with Susana. Susana, the floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Okay, I am going to do a quick screen share. So thank you, Serdar, for inviting me to this one-year remembrance of Dr. Marsella. I don't actually recall the precise moment of when I met Dr. Marsella, but it was after he had completed his service as a VP for academic affairs at the university. And I was a grad student at the time. And so he went from the VP back to being a regular professor in that building there that you see, that's Gartley Hall on the campus of Manoa. And I was a grad student at the time, so it must have been around, I don't know, the mid-1990s or so. And although when I first met him, I did not have any classes with him, for some reason we struck up this conversation in the hallway of Gartley Hall, and it had the central hallway. And at the time there was like one photocopy machine. So if you needed to photocopy, there was always like this little line outside the door. And so anyway, it must have been in that line because I kind of remember having this conversation, and we had a bonding moment over our shared Italian American background, which actually in Hawaii is not that common compared to where we both grew up in the eastern part of the United States, where there are, it's more common to bump into Italians. So what I want to say is that Dr. Marsella was unwavering in his call for elevating social justice in psychology. And he remains, as Serdar has mentioned, a symbolic champion locally in Hawaii as well as internationally. And he especially focused on the fact that mental health matters and culture matters in mental health. And I was lucky to be a part of some of the work that he did. He was especially allied with Indigenous people, cultures, and communities. And in fact, he facilitated with Dr. Kamana'o Crab, if not the first, one of the first courses in Native Hawaiian mental health offered at the campus. And I was fortunate to be a part of that class. And I really learned a lot, not only from Kamana'o, but also from Dr. Marsella. He later became my dissertation advisor in spite of the fact that he was not well at the time. And he never let that on. We had weekly meetings in his basement office in Gartley. And Gartley, before they upgraded it, was a bit dank downstairs. So he always had this very nice room that he transformed with candles and scented candles and a dehumidifier and all these things to make it comfortable for the rest of us. And later on, actually, when there was an earthquake in Hawaii, something happened with the foundation, and they found out that there was a subterranean river under the building. So it's no longer the Department of Psychology or where the psychology is located, but I have many memories of Dr. Marsella and other folks in that space. So he was committed to seeing all of us through, all of us who are grad students, along with other professors like Bhawuk, and I think Cliff is on the participant list as well. And even though he had numerous students receiving diplomas the year I did, he still joined my family, as you can see in this picture, which is the traditional lei giving after graduation ceremonies. We all go outside and people pass on their lei to their family member graduating. And he even came and met us for dinner at the Royal Hawaiian Lanai in Waikiki. So after he retired in the early 2000s, he remained one of my strongest advocates and cheerleaders as my career progressed across academic and community settings. And I'm very grateful for his presence in my life. So mahalo. With that, I would like to pass it to Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing your experience with Tony. And Marie?
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So I'm also very honored to be here today with you to speak a little bit about the legacy and the legacy work that's ongoing to support and honor the work and the life of Tony Marsella. So as Susana said, Tony was a mentor. So I found it ironic but happy that when I was preparing for this talk, I ran across one of his slides that just jumped out at me as being very appropriate and relevant. So I thought, that's great. See, he's still continuing his mentoring. So I thought I'd point out that most important point of his do and don'ts of being a speaker is do not embarrass the host, your family, your university, or profession. But he was also a realist, so he does note, if possible. So I'd like to just assure him and everyone that that's my intention with my remarks today. So thank you, Tony, for the reminder. So like Susana, I was one of the nearly 100 students that had the privilege of working with Tony. This is my dissertation time in 1999. And this was what many people would consider one of those endings. It was also very near the ending of Tony's academic career in 2003. And yet we both discovered that it really is true. Every ending is also a beginning, because this was the beginning of a new era for us to become friends and colleagues. Although, of course, he did continue his enormous efforts to be a mentor as well. So, in the next nearly 2 decades, that's when I believe that the freedom after retirement from the university allowed him to really pursue much of his interest in working on topics surrounding peace, war, and conflict. And what he's left are numerous lecture slides, his famous charts, many publications, the awards he received, many leadership positions, and again, emphasizing the mentorship where he made one of the areas of his largest impact. So I want to show you maybe a blast from the past for those of you who've had the privilege of being at one of his lectures. I'm not going to attempt to read these, but I included a couple of his slides just to illustrate. I'm going to flip to the next one so you can see he was known for his diagrams and charts and figures. He also loved to make things very colorful. Part of his keep everyone awake suggestion. And so the amount of content and knowledge that's embedded in just these 3 slides is immense, and something that I found very few other people able to duplicate the amount that he could communicate in one specific setting and one specific talk. So, as I said, I'm not going to attempt to do that today. Okay, as his friend, I also wanted to share something personal, and that was that when you're working in an area like peace and conflict, that for someone like Tony, there was a great amount of weight on him, especially as he aged, in trying to really reflect on how he could make a contribution, because it was very frustrating for him that this was an area where he felt he couldn't solve the world's problems, and it weighed heavily on him. So I had the opportunity to be with him during that struggle, and also to watch him find a way to express the struggle and cope with the struggle through poetry. So this is a few lines from his work on a very long and powerful poem that he wrote on Afghanistan. So that entry or return, because this was something that actually began for him in middle school when he discovered poetry. But this led to his opportunity to begin to self-publish some of these essays and poems. The one most relevant to today's talk is the book on war, peace, and justice. As he notes, an unfinished tapestry. Okay, so given what I just shared and all of the work that he has left, legacy is a really important part of the picture, and it was to him as well. So I'm just showing a couple photos of some of the many visits to Atlanta that I was fortunate enough to have to, in part, work with him on what he wanted for his legacy. What were some of the things that mattered to him? And obviously, we both recognize that this is not a job for one person. So I'm very fortunate to have a number of people, including Susana and others. Not everyone's shown here, but I wanted to give a quick shout out that this is not a solo project. So what are some of the things that Tony cared about? I don't think it would come to a surprise for anyone that knew him that he loved his books, and he had an enormous collection of over 2,000 books. So finding good homes for his books is an important component of the legacy work that needs to be done. Also finding a way to showcase and share and preserve the honors and awards that he received. So I'd like to highlight, this is the medal that he received for promoting international peace that was given to him in Japan for his contributions and promotion of international peace and understanding. Ongoing work. So I wanted to point out that was the easy stuff, right? And not really. But some of the challenges that remain, and I'm mentioning these specifically in case anyone out there has any insight or remembers any stories that might be useful to us in our work, but really determining the significance of many of the artifacts that were in his home that he really cherished. We know that this is an image, I believe, of an Indonesian cannon with a bullet hole in it. Why exactly he had it or where he got it from, I don't know. So if anyone knows, feel free to reach out. Likewise, much of his African art is beautiful, but something that we're still working to piece together the significance of it. We're also still working on finding ways to deliver some of his books to places in need like Cambodia. So again, if anyone has any helpful tips on affordable ways to share books, I'm sure that would be of great help. One of the more fun and scholarly tasks is to work with publishers on republishing or updating, revising some of his recent self-published work. So thanks to the speaker after me, we are going to work on the War, Peace, and Justice book with perhaps a new forward and getting that back out there. Okay, so the good news is that the Archives of the History of American Psychology have agreed to accept his unpublished work, including those charts, the PowerPoints, slide lectures, photos, honors. So there will be a collection of his work and materials for people to access, hopefully digitally. It will take some time. And I have a photo to show you of the inelegant process of preparing things to sort what goes to the archive and what doesn't. Another success is that this year the University of Hawaii will install some memorial bricks as part of their legacy program. This is not the actual bricks, they haven't been made yet, but we did a mock-up to show you the statement, by your actions, choose peace, be one with Hawaii, and his name, beloved educator and humanitarian. So basically, there is, even just looking at the slides, I feel a lot of sadness in thinking of him, but it was pointed out to me recently by a priest at the university that it's okay to be sad at our loss. He was actually a very important person to many of us. And yet, it's also okay to be happy. And the happiness comes from knowing that his work is continuing, that there are those out there, including those here today, who are still involved in the work, the good fight, as people say, to carry on the legacy and the work that he loves so much. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And before I hand it over to our next speaker, I'm going to go ahead and play the introductory video. Thank you. All right, here's the video. We hope. There.
Hello, my name is Tony Marsella, and I have the honor and the privilege of serving as the president of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, PSYSR, for the 2007-2008 year. I say honor and privilege because this is our 25th anniversary. Yes, 25 years ago, a group of eminent psychologists and committed lay people joined together to address the problem of nuclear war and destruction. In the past 25 years, their efforts have grown, and today, PSYSR is a much larger organization and much more active in addressing a broad spectrum of global problems. I joined PSYSR a number of years ago when I was attempting to bring my responsibilities as a professional, my responsibilities as a citizen, and my responsibilities as a person concerned with the state of the world together. PSYSR was a natural choice for me because of its long history of activism and its long history of success in making a difference in the world.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Kathleen. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Tony Marsella, my good friend and mentor, has told us all about the moral code that energized and empowered him and underlay all his work on peace, culture, and social justice. In his words, quote, show by your actions that you choose peace over war, freedom over oppression, voice over silence, service over self-interest, respect over advantage, courage over fear, cooperation over competition, action over passivity, diversity over uniformity, and justice over all. For many of you, that message, that moral code for behavior is familiar because he included it at the end of his email messages. He also elaborated on that code in much of his life's work, starting with his early work on culture and psychopathology and flowering in his conception of lifeism. In an article for the book Non-Killing Psychology, edited by Christie and Pym, Tony expands on his moral code and includes specific suggestions for action. Specifically, he urges everyone to choose peace over violence, conflict, and war, activism over passivity through letters, donations, and voting, voice over silence through nonviolent protests, and service over selfishness through volunteerism. In his article, he also encourages everyone to support non-killing as a way of life. He also encourages us to support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Nobel Prize Laureate Charter for a World Without Violence. In Tony's view, those moral choices are fundamental components of lifeism and are necessary to saving life on Earth at a time when, quote, we find ourselves as human beings assaulting and killing life in all its forms. Species are becoming extinct. Biodiversity is declining. Global warming is occurring, and there is a depletion of our water, energy, and agricultural resources, and wars and conflict are endemic. He argues that a solution for many of the challenges we face may be in moving beyond our conventional identifications with self, culture, nation, and even humanity to an identification with life itself through lifeism. In a speech at an international meeting where Tony noted that the pursuit of peace had been at the center of his life's work, he defined lifeism this way. Lifeism is that transcendent sense of awe, reverence, and connection in which we are moved beyond ourselves and beyond time and place to new levels of consciousness. Spirituality moves us as individuals and groups beyond our past to the richness of the immediacy of the moment. And with this comes an experience of attachment and belonging to something much larger than our individual or collective experiential levels. We are part of life, and that means we have ties to all forms of life on Earth and to the mysteries of the cosmos itself. For Tony, a key component in promoting lifeism as a survival orientation is understanding the importance of identity in human development. Born into a world of roaring confusion and occasions for terror, Humans need some larger group to help them identify who they are and what they should believe in. The achievement of lifism can be a product of that identity development. Indeed, Tony called lifism the ultimate identity, an identity that moves us beyond the struggles for identity at individual, cultural, and national levels. Tony was not an ivory tower idealist. He understood well the social forces that conspire to promote war and justify killing. In his provocative paper on World Order and Disorder, the games and gambles of life and lives, he describes the backroom players of the military-industrial complex that exercises control over life and lives across national boundaries to build and profit from their empires. These conspirators, he claimed, function en loco parentis. They insist we act for your welfare. Trust us, trust us. If you do not, don't stand in our way. This process is, he argued, a tragedy, a betrayal, a despicable effort, a tangled web of deceit, which continues across the spectrum of players involved in the games and gambles of world order and disorder. The players have, he warns us, the political, economic, and military power to continue their games and gambles without any moral justification or any concern for the survival of individuals or groups or even life on Earth. They care only about profits and power. In Tony's view, age-old questions regarding identity, who am I? What do I believe? What is my purpose? What are my responsibilities? How did I become who I am? Must now be answered within a context of unavoidable, competing and conflicting global forces that are giving rise to increasing levels of uncertainty, unpredictability, confusion, and fear. Indeed, he says, many of our traditional political, economic, social, and religious institutions, long a major source for shaping individual and collective identities, have become part of the problems we face in identity formation negotiation. And amidst all of this, he says, we find ourselves as human beings assaulting life in all its forms. We find ourselves, I'm losing my place, assaulting life in all of its forms. Species are becoming extinct, diversity is declining, global and agricultural resources are endemic. He thinks all of this can be transcended by an identification with lifism. Tony's own lifism has achieved incredible results on behalf of peace and social justice. Despite having personally experienced poverty, homelessness, prejudice, frustration, and pain in his own life, he devoted an incredible amount of time and energy to identifying and addressing the forces that underlie peace and hatred, othering, interpersonal and group violence, and the ultimate forms of violence such as war and genocide. What also impresses me is the breadth and depth of Tony's work for peace. He never bypassed an opportunity to speak out on behalf of peace, to educate on behalf of peace, and to recruit proponents of peace around the world. In my case, he called me one day out of the blue to admire my work on the role of moral disengagement in attempts to justify violence at all levels of society. We never met in person, but his phone calls became regular. He encouraged my work on moral engagement and disengagement, He submitted articles on peace to my blog, Engaging Peace, and he co-authored articles with me on peace, both for Engaging Peace and for Transcend Media. I know others, perhaps including some of you here today, have had and appreciated that kind of mentoring from Tony. I am also sure that many of you, like me, have asked yourself, how the hell do you find or make the time for all he does for his relentless pursuit of peace? Going forward, I intend to add the moral code that Tony inserted after his emails to the end of my own emails. I suggest all of you consider doing the same. Indeed, I think we should all do what we can to support Tony's exquisite proposal for a peace program at the University of Hawaii, or if not in Hawaii, then at any university or division of a university where the faculty and administration have demonstrated the kind of conscience and commitment that would make the development of such a program a reality and a resource in this dangerous and just troublesome time. Finally, if there's time today, I would love to hear from all of you here today concerning what brought you to this webinar, how Tony influenced you, what your views on lifeism and peace are, and what you hope to do to promote peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Just before we go to Dharm, I think it's important to remind our participants that many of Tony's essays, including his other types of work, including poems, are still available on the Transcend Media service. And if you are not very familiar with this site, you can type Transcend Media service, and you can find the website. And this website happens to be quite a big archive for all sorts of quite important peace-related journalism worldwide. So I would encourage you to check it out. Now, time-wise, we're not very free. We have about 15 more minutes. Therefore, if you have any questions or comments, you can use the Q&A box on your screen, and perhaps we may have time for 1 or 2 questions to entertain. But before we do that, let's go to our final speaker. He's joining us all the way from Hawaii, which is at this time quite early there. Dharm, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste. Aloha. I got to spend a week with Tony in Atlanta, and I'm a vegetarian, and he cooked for me, and he was such a magnanimous host. That is the part that it was good to see. And I tried to see him more than once. Once we had to cancel because he did not feel comfortable enough to have me at his home. And so I kept bugging him, and I succeeded in spending a week with him. One of the things I learned when I was visiting with him that he was a wrestler in high school. And I think that's who he was at heart in whatever he did. He was passionately wrestling with whatever issues came. Everybody mentioned how he was, big on activism. And I think even his academic life was full of activism. So teaching cross-cultural psychology itself was activism. The department, when he taught it the first time, it was like a coup in the department. The department chair just did not believe in cross-cultural stuff. And of course, he was trained in cross-cultural research. His work with PhD students, he challenged them, he pushed them. So, there was constantly that wrestler in him This is just like I'm processing it way many years later. I got to know him through Ed Dunbar, who I've known from International Academy of Intercultural Research, and he went to school here in Chaminade, and so he has Hawaii connection. So he was visiting, and he said, "Hey, let's go meet Tony." And I knew everything about Tony, just like Katie. You did not meet him, but you knew him. So I'm right here in University of Hawaii. I was a student 87 to 89. I know about him. I've heard a lot about him, but I've never met him. So I walked with Ed Dunbar in his office, and we just connected. I think it did help to be a Triandis student, but he just adopted me as a younger brother. And then he fought hard to bring me in psychology. They even created a position. He wanted me to be half-time in community psychology. That didn't work. He was really angry. He said, Bhawuk, be graduate affiliate faculty and work with the department. And I never looked back. I still continue. So there was activism in his life. There was wrestling in his life. I'm glad, Katie talked a lot about his work on peace, and Anne-Marie introduced his books. I wanted to focus on his 1998 article that has basically become the cornerstone of my academic life. I was trained as a cross-cultural psychologist, researcher, but he made me into an indigenous researcher. His article in 98 was published in American Psychological Association. My 99 paper starts with citing him. So I wanted to read the first paragraph because that paragraph became basically a paragraph that is in all my papers. Everything I do, I kind of, give credit to Tony for it. Marsella 1998 presented the template of global community psychology. He entreated researchers to replace the Western cultural traditions by more encompassing multicultural traditions and reiterated the need to emphasize the cultural determinants of human behavior, which has been discussed in the literature, Gergen, Gullers, Locke, and Mishra, Holick 91. He recommended the systems-oriented and noted that many indigenous psychologies are well equipped to deal with ascending dimensions of behavioral context from individual to family to society to nature to spirituality. It just clicked. I'm paraphrasing it, but those are his words. That just clicked with me in my own personal life, in my own practice as a spiritual person, going from individual to the world. That was the essence. But see what he's doing. He's hammering into the wrestler. He's wrestling with APA, with psychology that we need to recognize in the indigenous psychologies. He further proposed that qualitative research, including such methods as narrative accounts, discourse analysis, and ethnographic analysis should be encouraged. I've ended up using all these methods. My biggest contribution is textual analysis of Indian texts, not only the Bhagavad Gita, on which I have a book, which was published in a series. And, I've used Kabir's poetry to write a poem on love, which, he was big on love. So the end of that paragraph for my paper is this paper attempts to show how for global community psychology, useful psychological models can be derived from indigenous psychology. So all my papers start with Marsella 98 and end with, here is the contribution to global community psychology. It's kind of interesting that paper should have been cited 50,000 times, but it's only cited a few hundred times, 500 times or something. That's because the mainstream psychology ignores it. It's only the indigenous psychologists who use it. It's only the peace psychologists who use it. But you can see he was a wrestler at heart. And, when he talked about his, wrestling experience in high school, I could see. And, everybody who knows him, the animated Tony, he brings that wrestler. I want to share a quick story from our tradition in India. So Professor Sharma, who was a scholar of Sanskrit here, he and his father and his grandfather were great scholars. So when he was visiting his father, he said, Father, you have said this, which goes against the tradition. And he said, I don't think so. And then he pushed it and he said, here is what you said, and here is what the great masters have said. And then his father said, and this is a great lesson to understand culture, indigenous psychology in its own context. He said, son, when you get in the wrestling akhada, it's the field where you wrestle, you don't look at who is in front of you, you wrestle. And that's what Tony did, I think, all his life. He wrestled with department, he wrestled with the university, he wrestled to get Native Hawaiians a place in the university. He wrestled to get indigenous psychology a place in APA with his American Psychologist article. He supported his students. He worked with them hours. He nurtured his colleagues. I met with him and Cliff O'Donnell and others every month. That was a culture he created, and Cliff was a big part of it. And then every month we would meet and share our research. And then in department meetings, department meetings were exciting. The Culture Community Psychology Division. And selection of students meeting was exciting. So he was a living, breathing exemplar. And it has been just an honor and privilege to have him in my life from now till I leave the world. And I'm grateful to all of you to organize this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dharm. Thank you very much. I think today we have something very special happening. And I perhaps can say at this point, as we go along this webinar, there are thousands of classes happening across psychology departments and many webinars actually happening, perhaps in places where psychology is very strong and in other places across the world. But we can bet that in none of these sessions, nuclear weapons are addressed. So I was very moved by the video that Anne-Marie showed, where Tony was talking about how PSR was actually created to address the existential threat of nuclear weapons, which is still with us, despite the fact that so-called Cold War ended all years and decades ago. And I think it's particularly striking how a scholar can touch so many people and in so many different ways. So today we had the luxury, I should say perhaps, of having 4 different speakers joining us to reflect on Tony's contributions. And in my own experience with psychology, I often find that many of the contributions that people have, particularly their contributions to their colleagues, and particularly their contributions to their students, are rarely addressed. And yet these contributions are so very important. I do not see any questions or comments in the Q&A section, so that perhaps is an indication for us to wrap up. But before we wrap up, I should also mention the fact that we have the luxury this time with this webinar having a video to end the webinar. Therefore, before we go, we will start the webinar, and I will not be the person to start it. Behind the scenes, Roy is controlling the technical aspects. So once again, we thank Roy for doing this for us. And before we start the video, I should also mention the fact that we lost two other very important colleagues in the recent 2 years. One was Jean Maria Arrigo, and the other one was Mark Plisick. And we started these webinars recently, and therefore we did not have the time to pay our respects and pay our tribute to their contributions. But my hope is that perhaps as we go along next year, we will also be able to have webinars devoted to the contributions by Mark Plisick and Jean Maria Arrigo. So thank you very much. And we are in very different time zones. So I should say good day, good afternoon, and good evening, and also to some, good night. Thank you. Let's go with the video.
Yeah, because in fact, for many Italian American psychologists, we didn't have many of the opportunities that other people had with regard to supports from the community and the profession. And in so many ways, the song by Frank Sinatra is a song that characterizes the Italians in academia as well as in so many other areas. And so as you get this, I'm going to start talking and then we eventually go into song. And now the end is here, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, on which I'm certain. I live the life that's full. I travel each and every highway. Far more, much more than this. Frank Sinatra is.
Thank you, Tony, for the song. Thank you, Roy, again for helping us. Okay. We were fortunate to have 4 speakers today, and I think this has been a very important contribution to our Peace Psychology webinar series. So thank you for joining us, our speakers and our participants. Thank you very much. Bye now.